The sound of a pistol shot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, shattering the quiet evening like glass breaking against stone. Lucinda Darrow lowered her smoking revolver, her emerald eyes fixed on the man who had dared to corner her in the alley behind the Rusty Nail Saloon. The would-be assailant lay writhing in the dirt, clutching his bleeding shoulder and howling curses that would make even the most hardened cowboy blush. This wasn't the first time she'd had to defend herself, and she doubted it would be the last. "You crazy witch." The man spat, his face contorted with pain and fury. "Sheriff's gonna hang you for this." Lucinda tucked the small silver pistol back into the hidden pocket of her skirt. "Sheriff knows better than to try," she replied coolly. "Now get yourself to the doctor before you bleed all over my boots." It was 1879 in the Montana Territory, and Lucinda Darrow had earned herself quite the reputation in these parts. Some called her a gunslinger, others a lady of ill repute, but most simply called her Trouble. At 26, she'd seen more hardship than most folks twice her age. Orphaned at 14, she'd learned quickly that a woman alone in the West had precious few options for survival, none of them particularly virtuous. The saloon doors swung open behind her, and she didn't need to turn to know who had stepped into the night air. His spurs jingled with each deliberate step, the sound as familiar to her now as her own heartbeat. "Miss Darrow," came the deep, measured voice of Kieran Ashwood, "trouble seems to follow you like a loyal hound." Lucinda turned slowly, taking in the tall figure silhouetted against the golden light spilling from the saloon. Ashwood was new to Redemption Creek, having arrived just 3 months prior to claim a ranch left to him by a distant uncle. Unlike most of the men who passed through this frontier town, he carried himself with an air of quiet dignity that spoke of education and Eastern refinement, though he wore his gun belt with the easy confidence of a man who knew how to use it. "The trouble was here first, Mr. Ashwood," she replied, brushing dust from her emerald dress. "I merely responded in kind." Kieran's blue eyes flicked to the wounded man who was now staggering toward the doctor's office. "So I see." He stepped closer and she caught the scent of leather and clean soap. "Perhaps I could escort you home. These streets aren't safe for a lady after dark." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "I'm no lady, Mr. Ashwood, and I've managed these streets just fine for years without your gallantry." Something in his gaze softened. "Even so, I'd be honored to walk with you." Lucinda studied him for a long moment. At 32, Kieran Ashwood stood out among the rough men of Redemption Creek. His dark hair was always neatly trimmed, his clothes clean despite the dust that seemed to cover everything in this God-forsaken town. What puzzled her most was his persistent courtesy toward her, despite knowing full well about her checkered past. "As you wish," she finally conceded, though she kept her hand close to her hidden pistol. Trust was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. They walked in silence through the dimly lit streets. Most respectable folk were tucked safely in their homes at this hour, leaving the town to those who thrived in shadow and sin. Lucinda was acutely aware of the curious glances from the few passers by a notorious woman walking alongside the town's newest respectable rancher, made for intriguing gossip. "You've made quite a name for yourself," Kieran observed as they turned onto the quieter street where Lucinda rented a small house. Unlike most single women, she refused to live in the boarding house where her comings and goings would be subject to constant scrutiny. "Not all names are ones worth having, Mr. Ashwood." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "After 3 months of crossing paths, I think we can dispense with formalities." She arched an eyebrow. "And what would the good people of Redemption Creek think of such familiarity between us?" "Your reputation would be in tatters by sunrise." "I've never been one to let others dictate my associations," he replied, his voice firm. "Besides, I've heard the whispers about you, Lucinda. I suspect there's more fiction than fact in most of them." They reached her modest porch, and Lucinda turned to face him. In the silver moonlight, his features appeared carved from stone, handsome in a way that made something stir deep within her, something she'd thought long dead. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "The stories you've heard some are worse than you imagine." "I'd prefer to judge for myself," he countered. "I've never been one to put much stock in gossip." Lucinda shook her head, a sad smile playing at her lips. "You don't want a woman like me," she said, the words falling between them like a challenge. Kieran held her gaze, unwavering. "You're the only one I've thought about since arriving in this town." The directness of his admission caught her off guard. Most men who pursued her did so with crude propositions or false promises. His honesty was disarming. "You're a fool then," she whispered, though without conviction. "Perhaps," he smiled slightly. "But I'd like the chance to prove otherwise. Would you join me for dinner tomorrow at my ranch?" No prying eyes, no wagging tongues. Lucinda's instinct was to refuse to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment that came with hope. Yet something in his steady gaze made her hesitate. "One dinner," she found herself saying, "though I can't imagine what we'd have to talk about." "I'll send a carriage for you at sunset," Kieran said, his smile broadening. He tipped his hat slightly before stepping back. "Good night, Lucinda." As she watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness, Lucinda felt a strange flutter in her chest, something dangerously close to anticipation. It had been years since she'd allowed herself to feel anything resembling hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to heartbreak. And yet, as she unlocked her door and stepped inside her small, solitary home, she couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to be seen as something more than her past, to be valued for who she truly was rather than the whispered legends that followed her like shadows. Morning came with the harsh clarity that always seemed to accompany daylight in Redemption Creek. Lucinda stood at her kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, watching as the town slowly came to life. Shopkeepers swept their boardwalks, the blacksmith's hammer began its rhythmic pounding, and women with baskets made their way to the general store. A normal world, one that had never quite been hers. She'd spent the night alternating between chiding herself for accepting Kieran's invitation and wondering what to wear. It had been so long since she'd done anything so ordinary as have dinner with a man who wasn't expecting something in return. The novelty of it left her feeling unbalanced. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Few people ever called on her, making unexpected visitors a cause for caution. Retrieving her pistol from the side table, she approached the door. "Who is it?" she called, keeping to the side of the door frame. "Delivery for Miss Darrow," came a young voice. Lucinda cracked the door open to find a boy of about 12 holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Ashwood asked me to deliver this," the boy explained, extending the parcel toward her. "Said it was important you get it this morning." Curious, Lucinda took the package and pressed a coin into the boy's palm. "Thank you." Once alone, she carefully unwrapped the parcel to reveal a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. A small note fell from between its pages, something to pass the hours until sunset. "I thought you might enjoy her perspective on life's complexities. Until tonight." Kate Lucinda ran her fingers over the embossed leather cover. Books were a luxury she rarely afforded herself, though reading had been one of her few escapes in the years following her parents' deaths. How had he known? She'd never mentioned her love of literature to anyone in town. It didn't fit with the image everyone had of her. Throughout the day, she found herself returning to the book, reading passages between her chores and preparations. Dickinson's words about solitude and societal expectations resonated with her in ways that both comforted and unsettled her. By late afternoon, she had made her decision about the evening. She would go to dinner, but she would make certain Kieran Ashwood understood exactly who and what she was. No illusions, no pretense. As promised, a carriage arrived at sunset. The driver, an older man who introduced himself as Henry, Kieran's ranch foreman, helped her aboard with a respectful tip of his hat and no hint of judgment in his weathered face. The journey to the Ashwood Ranch took them beyond the town limits and into the rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains. The setting sun painted the landscape in fiery gold and deep purple. a beauty that never failed to move her despite her years in this harsh territory. The ranch house came into view as they crested a gentle hill, a substantial two-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around its front. It was neither ostentatious nor crude, but spoke of careful craftsmanship and an eye for practical comfort. Several outbuildings and corrals were arranged nearby, and in the pastures beyond, cattle grazed in the fading light. As the carriage rolled to a stop, Kieran emerged from the house. He'd shed his usual attire for clean dark trousers and a white shirt, his hair still damp from washing. The sight of him standing tall against the backdrop of the home he was building made Lucinda momentarily regret her decision to come. Men like him didn't end up with women like her. It was a truth as old as time itself. "You came," he said as he helped her down from the carriage, his voice tinged with what sounded like genuine pleasure. "I said I would," she replied, smoothing her dark blue dress, the most respectable one she owned. "Though I'm still not convinced it's wise." His smile didn't falter. "Wisdom is overrated. I prefer honesty and good company." He offered his arm. "Would you like to see the place before we eat? Henry's wife has prepared a meal that can wait a short while." The tour revealed a home still in progress, some rooms fully furnished with pieces that had clearly made the journey west from more civilized places, others waiting for attention. Kieran spoke with obvious pride about his plans for the ranch, the cattle he was breeding, the orchard he hoped to plant come spring. "You've accomplished much in just 3 months," Lucinda observed as they stood on the back porch, looking out over the land that was gradually becoming tamed under his direction. "I've had help," he acknowledged. "Good men willing to work hard for fair wages, and I came with clear purpose." He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "That makes all the difference, I think, knowing exactly what you want and being willing to work toward it without compromise." The intensity in his eyes made her look away, a luxury not everyone can afford. "No," he agreed quietly. "Not everyone." Dinner was served in a dining room warmed by a crackling fire. The table was set with fine china that seemed at odds with the frontier setting, but somehow fitting for the man across from her. The food was simple but expertly prepared: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables that must have come from some carefully tended garden. Kieran poured wine into crystal glasses that caught the firelight. "A small indulgence from my previous life," he explained, noting her surprise at such refinement. "Some habits are hard to break." "Previous life?" she inquired, taking a small sip of the rich red wine. "Before Montana. I practiced law in Boston for several years after graduating from Harvard." He cut into his beef. "It was the life mapped out for me since childhood, my father's firm, my grandfather's before that. Yet here you are, raising cattle in the middle of nowhere." A shadow crossed his face. "My wife died 3 years ago, consumption. After that, the life I'd built seemed hollow." He met her gaze across the table. "When my uncle died and left me this land, it felt like an opportunity to start again somewhere untouched by grief." The revelation of his widowhood surprised her. In the month since his arrival, he'd never mentioned a wife, though she now realized he occasionally touched the simple gold band he wore on a chain around his neck. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Losing those we love leaves wounds that never truly heal." "You speak from experience," he observed. Lucinda nodded slowly. "My parents died of fever when I was 14. I had no other family." "What happened to you?" he asked gently. She set down her fork, considering how much to reveal. "What usually happens to orphaned girls with no money and no protection." Her voice hardened. "I survived however I could." Understanding dawned in his eyes, but the pity she expected and dreaded never appeared. Instead, she saw something that looked remarkably like admiration. "And now," he prompted. "Now I exist in the spaces between respectability and ruin," she answered truthfully. "I deal cards at the Rusty Nail 3 nights a week. I mend clothes for those who don't ask questions about my past. I keep to myself and trust no one. A solitary life." A necessary one. Kieran refilled their glasses. The book, did you like it? The abrupt change of subject caught her off guard. Very much. Dickinson understands isolation in a way few do. She hesitated. How did you know I enjoy reading? A slight smile played at his lips. I've seen you at Jameson's store, lingering by the shelf where he keeps the few books he stocks. The way you touch them when you think no one is watching, like old friends you're reluctant to leave behind. The realization that he had been observing her so closely was unsettling. You've been studying me. Getting to know you, he corrected, even before we spoke. After dinner, they sat in comfortable chairs before the fire, the conversation flowing more easily with each passing hour. Kieran spoke of his childhood in Massachusetts, his years at university, the travels that had taken him across Europe before duty called him back to the family firm. Lucinda shared less, but found herself revealing more than she had intended: her love of music, her secret habit of writing down her thoughts in journals, her dream of someday seeing the ocean. It's late, she finally said, noticing the mantel clock showing nearly midnight. I should return to town. Of course, Kieran stood. Though I hope you'll consider visiting again, perhaps Sunday? The weather is supposed to be fair. We could ride out to the north pasture. The view of the mountains is spectacular. Lucinda hesitated. The evening had been pleasant, dangerously so. It would be easy to pretend, if only for a little while, that she could have a normal life, normal friendships, perhaps even normal affections. But such pretending inevitably led to pain. Mr. Ashwood, Kieran, she began, choosing her words carefully. I appreciate your kindness, but I think we both know that continued association between us would only damage your standing in Redemption Creek. I'm not someone a man like you should be seen with. His expression grew serious. I thought I made it clear that I don't concern myself with the opinions of those who would judge either of us based on gossip. It's not just gossip, she insisted, rising to her feet. The things they say about me, many of them are true. After my parents died, I lived in a brothel for 2 years. I've killed men, 3 to be exact, all in self-defense, but dead nonetheless. I've cheated at cards when necessary to keep food on my table. I've done what I needed to do to survive. She expected shock or disappointment to register on his face. Instead, he simply nodded. And yet here you stand, educated despite the lack of formal schooling, principled despite circumstances that would have broken many, independent in a world designed to make women dependent. He stepped closer. Do you think I care more about who you were forced to be at 14 than who you've chosen to become since? You should, she whispered, the intensity of his gaze making her heart race. Most would. I'm not most people, Lucinda. His hand reached up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. And neither are you. The gesture, so unexpectedly tender, nearly undid her. She stepped back, needing distance from the dangerous warmth his nearness created. I should go, she repeated, more firmly this time. Kieran didn't argue. I'll have Henry bring the carriage around. The ride back to town passed in silence, but not an uncomfortable one. Lucinda found herself watching the stars scattered across the vast Montana sky, brighter here away from the town's meager lights. She felt oddly at peace despite the tumult of emotions the evening had stirred. As the carriage stopped before her house, Kieran descended first and offered his hand to help her down. In the moonlight, his features were softened, but his eyes remained as intense as ever. Thank you for coming tonight, he said, still holding her hand. Will you think about Sunday? Lucinda knew she should refuse, draw a firm boundary between them before either could develop expectations that reality would inevitably shatter. Yet looking up at him, she found herself nodding. I'll think about it, she promised, gently withdrawing her hand from his. Good night, Kieran. Good night, Lucinda. She was halfway to her door when his voice stopped her. Lucinda, she turned. Whatever you decide about Sunday, know this: when I look at you, I don't see the past you're running from. I see the woman standing before me now. That's all that matters to me. His words followed her inside, echoing in her mind long after she heard the carriage depart. She moved through her small house, lighting a lamp and removing her best dress with care. As she prepared for bed, her gaze fell on the book of poetry he'd given her, now resting on her bedside table. Opening it to a random page, her eyes fell upon the words, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all." For the first time in many years, Lucinda allowed herself to acknowledge the fragile bird of hope that had begun to stir within her own soul, a dangerous, beautiful thing she had long thought extinct. The following morning brought a complication Lucinda hadn't anticipated. As she walked toward the general store, a hand suddenly gripped her arm, pulling her roughly into the space between two buildings. She reached for her hidden pistol but stopped when she recognized the face before her. "Marshall Blake," she said coldly, "manhandling women in alleyways now." How the mighty have fallen. James Blake had once been Redemption Creek's sheriff before being dismissed for corruption and excessive violence. He'd departed town 8 months ago, reportedly to try his luck in the gold fields further west. His return boded ill particularly for Lucinda, who had testified against him before the town council. "You ruined me, Darrow," he growled, his breath heavy with whiskey despite the early hour. His once handsome face was now weathered and scarred, his lawman's badge replaced by the shabby clothes of a drifter. "Lost my job, my reputation, all because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. You ruined yourself," she countered, maintaining a calm she didn't feel. "Beating that boy half to death for stealing a loaf of bread was your doing, not mine." His grip tightened painfully. "I saw you last night riding out of town with that fancy rancher. Got yourself a new protector, have you?" His lips curled into a sneer. "Wonder what he'd think if he knew all the details of your colorful history, things even this town don't know about." Fear flickered through her, but she refused to let it show. "Let go of me, Blake. Whatever grudge you're nursing, it's not worth adding a salt to your sins." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Stay away from Ashwood. A woman like you doesn't deserve a second chance. You try to build something with him, and I'll make sure he knows exactly what kind of whore he's bedding." With a final shove, he released her and stalked away, leaving Lucinda shaken but outwardly composed. She straightened her shawl, took a deep breath, and continued toward the store as if nothing had happened, though her mind raced with the implications of Blake's threat. She had no illusions about her past. She had done what was necessary to survive, and most of it she wouldn't take back given the circumstances. But there were chapters of her history that even the gossips of Redemption Creek didn't know, moments of darkness she had buried deep. The thought of Kieran learning these things from Blake's vengeful lips made her stomach twist with dread. By Sunday morning, Lucinda had made her decision. She penned a brief note to Kieran explaining that she wouldn't be joining him for the ride to the North Pasture, citing a sudden commitment in town. It was a coward's way out, perhaps, but safer than the alternative. If Blake was determined to poison whatever was growing between them, the kindest thing she could do was sever it cleanly before Kieran became collateral damage in her complicated life. She gave the note to a neighbor's boy with a coin and instructions to deliver it to the Ashwood ranch, then set about her day with grim determination. She would work extra shifts at the saloon, save every penny, and perhaps by spring, she would have enough to leave Redemption Creek behind. Start fresh somewhere no one knew her name or her history. The day passed slowly. Lucinda occupied herself with mending clothes, an activity that required just enough concentration to keep her mind from wandering too often to thoughts of Kieran and what might have been. As evening approached, she prepared for her shift at the Rusty Nail, donning the green dress that brought the most generous tips from the card players. She was fastening the last button when a knock sounded at her door, firm and insistent. Instinct told her who it was even before she opened it. Kieran stood on her porch, his expression a complex mixture of concern and determination. He held her note in one hand. "You're not coming," he said simply. "As I explained, I have obligations here," she replied, gesturing vaguely toward the saloon visible at the end of the street. His blue eyes studied her face intently. That's not the real reason. It doesn't matter, she said, moving to close the door. I need to go or I'll be late for my shift. His hand caught the edge of the door, preventing its closure without forcing it, giving her the choice. Lucinda, please. If I've done something to offend you, I'd like the chance to make it right. The sincerity in his voice nearly broke her resolve. You've done nothing wrong, she admitted. But this whatever is happening between us, it can't continue. It's best ended now before. Before what? He pressed when she trailed off. Before you learn the truth. Before you look at me the way everyone else does. Before I have to see disappointment replace that warmth in your eyes. Before either of us develops expectations that can't be fulfilled, she finished instead. You're a good man, Kieran. You deserve better than the complications I bring. Shouldn't that be my decision? His voice had softened, but his gaze remained unwavering. What's really happening here, Lucinda? Something changed between dinner and today. She hesitated, weighing her options. If she told him about Blake's threats, Kieran would likely confront the man, a dangerous proposition given Blake's reputation for violence and vindictiveness. If she remained silent, Blake would eventually make good on his promise, revealing her past in the most damaging way possible. James Blake is back in town, she finally said, watching his face for recognition. A shadow crossed his features. The former sheriff, I've heard stories. He blames me for his dismissal. He made certain threats. She straightened her shoulders. One of which was to ensure you learned details about my past that would change how you see me. Understanding dawned in Kieran's eyes. So you're pulling away to protect me from learning things you believe would drive me away anyway. Put so bluntly, her reasoning seemed flawed, but she nodded nonetheless. Lucinda, he said gently, there is nothing in your past that could change what I feel for you now. You can't know that. I know enough. He stepped closer, his presence filling her small doorway. I know you survived when many would have broken. I know you've built a life on your own terms in a world that offers women few choices. I know your eyes light up when you talk about books, that you're kinder than you pretend to be, and that you've never taken the easy path when the right one was available. His words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket on a cold night. Kieran, let me deal with Blake, he continued. Whatever threats he's making, whatever past he thinks he can use against you, we'll face it together. The offer was so tempting to not be alone for once, to have someone standing beside her rather than across from her. But years of self-reliance made trust difficult. I need to think, she said finally. And I really do have to work tonight, he nodded, stepping back. May I walk you to the saloon? The request was so ordinary, so gentlemanly, that it almost made her smile despite the gravity of their conversation. If you wish. They walked side by side through the early evening streets, drawing curious glances from those they passed. Lucinda was acutely aware of the gossip they were generating, the respectable rancher and the notorious Lucinda Darrow, together in plain view of the whole town. People are staring, she murmured. Let them, he replied, unconcerned. Their opinions matter little to me. At the entrance to the Rusty Nail, he stopped. The sounds of piano music and raucous laughter spilled out into the street, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of the man before her. When do you finish tonight? He asked. Around midnight, usually? I'll come back then, he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request but a statement of fact. We can talk more when you're done. Before she could argue, he took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a courtly gesture so at odds with their surroundings that it left her momentarily speechless. Until midnight, he said, releasing her hand and stepping back. Lucinda watched him walk away, her hand still tingling from the warmth of his lips. Only when he had disappeared around a corner did she enter the saloon, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. The night passed in a blur of cards, drinks, and the usual saloon chaos. Lucinda dealt poker with mechanical precision, her thoughts elsewhere despite her best efforts to focus. As midnight approached, a commotion near the door drew everyone's attention. James Blake stumbled in, already drunk and looking for trouble. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Lucinda at her card table. A malicious smile spread across his face as he made his way toward her, shoving aside anyone in his path. Well, he slurred, bracing himself against her table. If it ain't the high and mighty Miss Darrow, still playing at being better than she is. The men at her table shifted uncomfortably. Lucinda kept her expression neutral. You're interrupting a game, Blake. Either sit down and play or move along. Oh, I got a different game in mind, he sneered. How about we tell these fine gentlemen some stories about your days at Madame Rosa's house in Denver? Or maybe that business in Cheyenne with the banker's son. A cold knot formed in Lucinda's stomach, but she maintained her composure. You're drunk, Blake. Go sleep it off. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. Don't you dismiss me. You take your hand off the lady. The voice calm, controlled, but laced with steel cut through the sudden silence of the saloon. Kieran stood just inside the doorway, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard as he focused on Blake. Blake's grip loosened in surprise, allowing Lucinda to pull free. This ain't your concern, Ashwood, he growled, turning to face the newcomer. This is between me and her. That's where you're wrong, Kieran replied, walking forward with measured steps. Any business you think you have with Miss Darrow is very much my concern. The saloon had gone completely quiet now, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. Lucinda felt rooted to the spot, torn between fear for Kieran's safety and a strange, unfamiliar warmth at his public defense of her. Blake gave a harsh laugh. You don't know what you're getting yourself into, Harvard. This woman ain't worth the trouble she'll bring you. Again, you're wrong, Kieran said, now standing just a few feet from Blake. Despite being of similar height, Kieran's quiet confidence made him seem the larger man. Miss Darrow is worth a great deal more than you can comprehend. Now I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself further. Blake's hand twitched toward his gun, but Kieran's voice stopped him cold. I wouldn't, he advised quietly. I may prefer words to violence, but I assure you I'm quite capable with a firearm when necessary. Something in his tone, a certainty that brooked no argument, made Blake hesitate. His bloodshot eyes darted between Kieran and Lucinda, calculating his odds. This ain't over, he finally muttered, backing toward the door. Neither of you? Actually, it is, Kieran replied. Sheriff Thompson is quite interested in your return to town, given the outstanding warrants for your arrest in both Wyoming and Colorado. I took the liberty of informing him of your presence earlier this evening. As if on cue, the saloon doors swung open to reveal Sheriff Thompson and two deputies, their expressions grim. James Blake, Thompson announced formally, you're under arrest for assault, extortion, and fleeing justice. Come quietly now. The look of stunned betrayal on Blake's face would have been comical under different circumstances. With a final venomous glare at Lucinda and Kieran, he allowed himself to be disarmed and led away in handcuffs. As conversation gradually resumed in the saloon, Kieran approached Lucinda's table. Are you all right? He asked softly. She nodded, still processing what had just happened. How did you know about the warrants? A slight smile touched his lips. I was a lawyer, remember? I still have contacts in various territories. When you mentioned Blake's return, I made some inquiries. The realization that he had gone to such lengths not just to protect her, but to permanently remove the threat Blake posed left her momentarily speechless. I believe you were about to finish your shift, Kieran continued, gesturing to the now abandoned card table. May I still walk you home afterward? Finding her voice, Lucinda nodded. Give me a few minutes to settle accounts with the owner. True to his word, Kieran waited patiently while she completed her end of shift duties. When they finally stepped out into the cool night air, the streets of Redemption Creek were deserted, the town having settled into the quiet hours before dawn. They walked in comfortable silence for several blocks before Lucinda spoke. Thank you for what you did tonight. "You're welcome, though I suspect you could have handled Blake yourself if necessary," he replied. "I've seen how capable you are." "Perhaps," she admitted. "But it's been a long time since anyone stood up for me that way." She hesitated. It meant something. They reached her house and Lucinda unlocked the door, lighting a lamp inside. To her surprise, Kieran remained on the porch rather than following her in. "Aren't you coming inside?" she asked, puzzled by his hesitation. "I don't want to presume," he answered simply, "or to give anyone cause to speak ill of you." The consideration behind his words, his awareness of how easily her reputation could be further damaged, touched her deeply. "I think my reputation can withstand a late-night conversation," she said with a small smile. "Please come in." Inside, she busied herself making coffee while Kieran surveyed her small home. Unlike most bachelor accommodations in Redemption Creek, Lucinda's house was meticulously clean and thoughtfully arranged. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with well-worn volumes, evidence of her private passion for reading. A small writing desk stood near the window, papers neatly stacked upon it. "You have a lovely home," he observed, examining her modest collection of books. "It's simple, but it's mine," she replied, bringing 2 cups of coffee to the small table. "Paid for with honest work, mostly." He smiled at her qualification. "Mostly. I may have helped the odds in my favor at cards once or twice when the rent was due," she admitted, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Resourceful," he commented, taking a seat across from her. "Though I suspect your natural intelligence would have found other solutions had they been available." They sipped their coffee in companionable silence for a moment before Kieran spoke again. "Blake won't trouble you again. The warrants are legitimate. He'll be transported to Wyoming within the week to stand trial." Relief washed over her. "Thank you for that. Though I wonder if you realize what you've done by publicly defending me tonight." "You mean the gossip?" He shrugged slightly. "As I've said before, I care little for the opinions of those who would judge without understanding." "It's not just gossip," she insisted. "Blake was right about some things. There are parts of my past that would shock even the most open-minded." Kieran set down his cup, his expression serious. "Lucinda, we all have chapters in our lives we wouldn't choose to read aloud. Whatever you've done, whatever circumstances forced upon you, they've shaped you into the woman you are today. That's the woman I care about." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Lucinda found herself at a crossroads: continue to hold him at arm's length, or take the risk of allowing him closer, secrets and all. "After my parents died," she began slowly, "I had nowhere to go, no family, no friends willing to take in an orphaned girl. I ended up in Denver, hungry and desperate." The memories were painful, but she forced herself to continue. "A woman found me trying to steal food from her kitchen garden. Madame Rosa, she called herself. She ran a house of entertainment." Kieran's expression remained unchanged, giving her the courage to continue. "She took me in. Not as one of her girls, she was clear about that. I was too young and she had her own code of ethics, strange as that might sound. I worked as a maid, a cook's assistant, sometimes serving drinks to the customers." Lucinda stared into her coffee. "I learned things there no girl should know at 14, but I also learned to read people, to understand what drives them. Rosa taught me cards, said I had a natural talent for numbers and reading faces." She glanced up, expecting to see judgment in Kieran's eyes, but found only attentive interest. "When I was 16, one of the customers became fixated on me. A wealthy man, powerful in Denver society. Rosa tried to protect me, but he was persistent. One night he cornered me alone." Her voice hardened at the memory. "I fought back. Hard, he fell, hit his head on a marble hearth. He died instantly." Kieran's hand moved across the table to cover hers, a silent gesture of support. "Rosa helped me flee Denver that night. Gave me money, a pistol, and advice I've never forgotten. Trust yourself first, trust others rarely, and never apologize for surviving." Lucinda took a deep breath. "I drifted for a while after that. Cheyenne, Laramie, eventually here. I've dealt cards, mended clothes, worked as a boundary rider during roundup when hands were scarce. I've defended myself when necessary. I've never sold my body, but I've skirted close to many other moral lines. She met his gaze directly. That's who I am, Kieran. A woman with blood on her hands and darkness in her past. Not the kind of woman a man like you builds a future with. You don't want a woman like me, she finished softly. Kieran's grip on her hand tightened slightly. You're the only one I want, he countered, his voice steady with conviction. What I see before me is a survivor. A woman of extraordinary strength and courage. Yes, you've faced darkness, but you've never been consumed by it. That speaks to the quality of your character far more than any circumstances beyond your control. His words, spoken with such certainty, began to crack the protective walls she'd built around her heart. How can you be so sure? She whispered. Because I've watched you in this town for 3 months, he replied. I've seen your kindness to Widow Jenkins when others shun her. I've noticed how you slip coins to the Miller children when their father drinks away his wages. I observed you standing up to the town council when they wanted to force the Chinese laundry out of business. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Your actions reveal your true nature, Lucinda. The rest is just the hand life dealt you. Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sadness, but of something far more dangerous, hope. And what of your reputation, your future here? Associating with me publicly as you did tonight will have consequences. Let it, he said simply. Any community that would condemn me for caring about a woman of your quality isn't one whose opinion I value. The word caring hung between them, laden with possibility. Lucinda found herself at another crossroads: retreat into the safety of solitude, or step forward into the unknown territory of trust. I care for you too, she admitted quietly, the words feeling foreign on her tongue after years of emotional isolation. More than I should, more than is wise. Kieran smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes and seemed to illuminate the small room. Then wisdom be damned, he said softly. I'd rather have an unwise truth than a prudent falsehood between us. He rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and gently drew her to her feet. Standing face to face, the height difference between them meant she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, the touch so tender it made her breath catch. May I? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Unable to find words, Lucinda nodded slightly. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it could have been the brush of a butterfly's wing. Unlike the demanding, possessive kisses she had known in the past, this was an offering, a question rather than a claim. When he began to pull away, Lucinda found herself rising on her toes, her hand moving to the back of his neck to draw him back. Their second kiss deepened, warmth blooming between them like a desert flower after rain. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. I should go, he said reluctantly. It's late, and giving the gossips further fuel would be unwise, regardless of my personal feelings on the matter. Though part of her wanted him to stay, Lucinda appreciated his respect for her reputation, what remained of it. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, he promised with a smile. Perhaps we could finally take that ride to the North Pasture. I'd like that. He kissed her once more, briefly but with unmistakable tenderness, before retrieving his hat. At the door, he turned back. Sleep well, Lucinda. You too, Kieran. After he left, Lucinda stood in the center of her small home, fingers pressed to lips still warm from his kiss. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the future seemed to hold something other than mere survival. It held possibility. The following weeks unfolded with a dreamlike quality that left Lucinda both elated and wary. True to his word, Kieran remained undeterred by the whispers that followed them through town. He escorted her openly to Sunday services, sat beside her at community gatherings, and frequently invited her to his ranch for dinner or afternoon rides across his land. As autumn painted the Montana landscape in golds and reds, their relationship deepened. Lucinda found herself lowering her guard incrementally, allowing Kieran to see beyond the hardened exterior she presented to the world. In turn, he shared more of himself, his grief over his wife's death, his complicated relationship with his Eastern family who disapproved of his Western venture, his hopes for building something meaningful in this wild territory. On a crisp October afternoon, they rode to a high ridge overlooking the valley where Redemption Creek nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. The aspen trees shimmered gold in the sunlight, creating a scene of such beauty it momentarily took Lucinda's breath away. "I never tire of this view," Kieran said as they dismounted, securing their horses to a nearby tree. He spread a blanket on a patch of grass and they sat side by side, sharing the picnic lunch his cook had prepared. "Nor I," Lucinda agreed, accepting the cup of coffee he poured from a thermos. "Though I confess I rarely took the time to appreciate it before. Too busy surviving to notice beauty," she nodded. "Something like that. When each day is focused on making it to the next, there's little room for contemplation." Kieran studied her profile as she gazed out over the valley. "And now," a small smile touched her lips. "Now I find myself noticing everything, the way the light changes through the day, how the first frost silvered the grass last week, the sound of the creek after rain." She turned to face him. "You've changed how I see the world, Kieran." "For the better, I hope," he said softly. "Yes," she admitted, "though it frightens me sometimes. What does, caring this much?" She set down her cup, choosing her words carefully. "I've spent years ensuring I needed nothing and no one, depending only on myself. Now you find yourself with connections," he finished for her. "Ties that bind but also make us vulnerable." "Exactly." She met his gaze directly. "What if I'm not built for this, Kieran? What if I've been alone too long to know how to be with someone else?" He reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "We're all learning as we go, Lucinda, even those of us who have loved before." A shadow of old grief crossed his face briefly. "Perhaps especially those of us who have." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the autumn breeze stirring the golden leaves around them. Eventually, Kieran spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "I received a letter yesterday from my father." Lucinda tensed slightly. She knew from their previous conversations that Kieran's family had never approved of his decision to leave Boston for the Montana Territory. "What did he want?" "To inform me that my continued absence has been noted with significant disappointment by the family's social circle," he replied with a wry smile. "And to remind me that my place at the firm remains open should I come to my senses and return east. Will you?" The question escaped her before she could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she'd intended. Kieran's response was immediate and firm. "No, my life is here now." His eyes held hers. "My heart is here." The simple declaration sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Even knowing what associating with me might cost you, the whispers haven't stopped, Kieran. They likely never will." "Let them whisper," he said dismissively. "I've found that most people's opinions matter far less than we're taught to believe." He shifted to face her more directly. "Lucinda, I need you to understand something. I'm not here with you in spite of your past. I'm here because the woman that past created is extraordinary, strong, resilient, compassionate despite having been shown little compassion." He took both her hands in his. "I love you. Not some idealized version of you, not who you might become. You, exactly as you are today." The words hung in the clear autumn air between them. Lucinda felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her, not violently, but fundamentally. No one had said those words to her since her parents' death. She had convinced herself she neither needed nor wanted to hear them. Yet now, spoken in Kieran's steady voice, they seemed to unlock something long frozen within her. "I don't know if I remember how to love," she whispered, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "But I know that when I'm with you, I feel things I thought were lost to me forever. Peace, joy." She took a deep breath. "Hope." She met his gaze directly. "If that's love, then yes, I love you too. God help us both." The smile that illuminated his face could have outshone the sun. He leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that seemed to seal their declarations, to make tangible the invisible bond growing between them. When they separated, he kept his face close to hers, his blue eyes alight with emotion. "Marry me," he said simply. Lucinda pulled back slightly, startled by the unexpected proposal. "Kieran, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," he assured her, keeping hold of her hands. "I love you. I want to build a life with you." "But your family will either accept my choice or continue their disapproval from a distance," he interrupted gently. "Either way, it changes nothing about what I want. And what of the town? The gossip would only intensify if we married." "Redemption Creek will adapt as frontier towns always do," he replied confidently. "Those whose opinions matter already respect you for your strength and independence, whatever their public stance might be. The rest." He shrugged. "The rest don't matter." Lucinda's mind raced. Marriage had never been part of her imagined future. She had long ago accepted that her past had closed that door permanently. Yet here was Kieran, offering her not just love but legitimacy, a place at his side openly acknowledged and sanctioned. "I need time," she finally said. "Not because I don't love you, but because this is overwhelming." Understanding softened his expression. "Of course, take all the time you need." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Just know that my heart is decided, Lucinda. It has been since that night I walked you home from the saloon and you fired that warning shot over that drunk's head." She laughed despite herself, remembering the incident from months ago. Most men would have run in the opposite direction after witnessing that. "I'm not most men," he reminded her with a smile. "And you're certainly not most women." They packed up their picnic as the afternoon waned, the conversation turning to lighter topics. As they rode back toward town, Lucinda found herself studying the landscape with new eyes, seeing not just its wild beauty, but its possibility. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future here, not as an outsider living on society's margins, but as a woman with roots, with connections, with a place that was truly hers. The idea was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Winter came early to the Montana Territory that year, bringing heavy snows by mid-November that transformed Redemption Creek into a world of white silence. The harsh weather isolated the town, making travel difficult and focusing community life inward. Lucinda found unexpected warmth in this enforced intimacy. Where once she would have retreated into solitude during the winter months, she now found herself increasingly integrated into the life of the town. Kieran's open affection and unwavering respect had gradually shifted perceptions, at least among some. The minister's wife invited her to join the quilting circle. The school teacher asked for her help organizing a Christmas pageant. Small changes, but significant ones. More surprising was the shift in her relationship with Kieran's ranch hands. Initially wary of their boss's involvement with a woman of Lucinda's reputation, they had gradually come to respect her knowledge of horses, her skill with a gun, and her willingness to work alongside them when needed. Henry's wife, Martha, had become something of a confidante, her no-nonsense pragmatism a balm to Lucinda's occasional doubts. "He loves you something fierce," Martha observed one afternoon as they worked together in the ranch house kitchen, preparing food for the hands who were repairing fences damaged in a recent blizzard. "Never seen a man look at a woman the way he looks at you, except maybe my Henry when we were young." Lucinda smiled, continuing to knead dough for the bread they were baking. "He's a good man." "Better than good," Martha corrected, stirring a pot of stew. "And he deserves an answer, don't you think? It's been nearly 2 months since he proposed." Lucinda's hands stilled momentarily. "How did you know about that?" Martha gave her a knowing look. "Small ranch, big ears. Besides, Henry's known Mr. Ashwood since he arrived. Says he's never seen him so certain about anything." "It's complicated," Lucinda sighed, resuming her kneading with perhaps more force than necessary. "Only because you're making it so," the older woman replied bluntly. You love him, he loves you, the rest is just details. Details like the fact that half the town still crosses the street to avoid walking past me, Lucinda challenged. Or that his family back east would be horrified if he married someone like me. Martha's weathered face softened with understanding. Girl, you think you're the first woman with a past to find love. This is the frontier. Most of us came here running from something or toward something, often both. She set down her spoon and faced Lucinda directly. My own grandmother was Cheyenne. My grandfather was a fur trapper who everyone said would come to no good end. They faced worse than whispers, believe me. But they built a life that meant something, raised children who were proud of both their heritages. She gestured toward the window, where beyond the snow-covered yard, the vast landscape stretched toward distant mountains. Out here, we're judged more by what we do than by what we've done. You've earned respect by standing on your own, protecting yourself, speaking truth when it needed speaking. Don't throw away a chance at happiness because some folks are too small-minded to see your worth. Lucinda absorbed the older woman's words, finding unexpected wisdom in their simplicity. I'm afraid, she admitted quietly. Not of what others think, not really. I'm afraid of believing in this, of letting myself depend on it and then losing it somehow. Martha nodded slowly. That's a fear every woman understands, especially out here where life can change in an instant. But ask yourself this. Is protecting yourself from possible future pain worth giving up certain present joy? The question lingered in Lucinda's mind long after she'd returned to town that evening. As she prepared for bed in her small house, a fire crackling in the hearth against the bitter cold outside, she found herself taking stock of how much had changed in the months since Kieran had entered her life. Her solitary existence had gradually expanded to include connections she'd never imagined possible, not just with Kieran, but with others in the community who had begun to see her as more than the sum of rumored sins. She'd started teaching reading to a small group of women who worked at the laundry, finding unexpected fulfillment in sharing her love of books. She'd even been asked to help organize the town's Christmas celebrations, an inclusion that would have been unthinkable a year ago. And then there was Kieran himself, patient, steadfast Kieran, who looked at her with a warmth that melted the ice around her heart a little more each day. Who respected her independence even as he offered her partnership. Who saw her past not as a stain, but as the forge that had shaped her strength. A knock at her door startled her from her reflections. Visitors were rare during winter evenings, particularly in weather as bitter as tonight's. Retrieving her pistol from its customary place, she approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "It's me," came Kieran's voice, muffled by the howling wind. "Sorry for the late hour." Surprised, Lucinda quickly unbolted the door. Kieran stood on her porch, snow dusting his coat and hat, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Kieran, what on earth are you doing out in this weather? May I come in?" he asked, stomping snow from his boots. "It's rather inhospitable out here for conversation." She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. As he removed his coat and hat, she noticed he carried a small leather satchel. "Is everything all right at the ranch?" she asked, concerned by his unexpected appearance. "Everything's fine," he assured her, moving toward the fire to warm his hands. "But there's something I needed to discuss with you that couldn't wait until the weather cleared." Curiosity piqued, Lucinda gestured for him to sit while she poured them each a cup of coffee. "It must be important to bring you out on a night like this." "It is." He accepted the coffee gratefully, taking a long sip before setting it aside and reaching for the satchel. "I received another letter from Boston today, from my father's lawyer." A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran through Lucinda. "What did it say?" Instead of answering directly, Kieran withdrew several documents from the satchel and laid them on the small table between them. "My father has officially removed me from the family business. He's also informed me that my continued frontier dalliance, as he puts it, has resulted in my being excluded from certain social and financial circles back east." Lucinda's heart sank. This was exactly what she had feared, that associating with her would cost him his standing with his family and his past life. "Kieran, I'm so sorry, don't be," he interrupted, his expression not downcast but determined. "Because this," he tapped the documents, "has made something abundantly clear to me. Boston is my past. This place, this life I'm building here with you, I hope is my future. My father's actions have simply confirmed what I already knew in my heart." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I rode out in this storm because I couldn't wait another day to ask you again, with complete certainty. Lucinda Darrow, will you marry me? Not someday, not when things are perfect, but now as we are where we are." The earnestness in his voice, the steadfast certainty in his eyes, broke down the last of her reservations. In that moment, Lucinda realized that the choice before her was not between safety and risk, but between a half-life of guarded solitude and the full, messy, glorious experience of loving and being loved in return. "Yes," she said, the word emerging with surprising ease. "Yes, I'll marry you." Joy transformed Kieran's face. He stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "You're sure?" he asked, searching her eyes. "No more doubts." "Oh, I'll have doubts," she admitted with a small laugh. "Doubt is an old friend of mine, but I'm choosing to believe in this in us despite them." He kissed her then, a kiss that carried all the promise of their shared future, all the certainty of his love for her. When they separated, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this with me for weeks," he confessed, opening it to reveal a ring, not an ostentatious diamond, but a delicate band of gold set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny emeralds. "It was my grandmother's. My mother sent it to me after my first letter about you, before my father's." Intervention. She said any woman who could make me find purpose again deserved a family heirloom. Lucinda stared at the ring in surprise. "Your mother approves?" A smile touched Kieran's lips. "My mother was the daughter of Irish immigrants who worked as a scullery maid before catching my grandfather's eye. She understands more about crossing social boundaries than my father ever will." He removed the ring from its box. "May I?" Wordlessly, Lucinda extended her left hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. The simple beauty of it, elegant but not showy, touched her deeply. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Like the woman wearing it," Kieran replied, raising her hand to his lips. Outside, the winter storm continued to rage, but within the small house, a different kind of warmth bloomed, the warmth of two souls who had found in each other not just love, but home. They were married on Christmas Eve in Redemption Creek's small church, transformed for the occasion with evergreen boughs and candles that cast a golden glow over the simple ceremony. The weather had cleared just enough to allow travel, bringing ranchers and townspeople alike to witness the union of Kieran Ashwood and Lucinda Darrow. Not everyone in town approved, of course. Several prominent families were conspicuously absent, their empty pews a silent statement of judgment. But to Lucinda's surprise, many more came than she had expected. Martha and Henry from the ranch, the Chinese laundry owner and his family, the schoolteacher, even Sheriff Thompson and his wife. Most moving was the presence of several women from the Rusty Nail, dressed in their Sunday best, their faces reflecting genuine happiness for a woman who had always treated them with dignity when others did not. Their attendance raised eyebrows among some of the more conservative townspeople, but Kieran had been adamant that anyone Lucinda considered a friend was welcome. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Lucinda wore a dress of deep blue velvet, not white, which would have seemed a pretense with the pearl and emerald ring as her only adornment. Kieran, handsome in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the short aisle alone, her head held high. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" the minister asked, following tradition despite knowing Lucinda had no family to speak for her. Before she could respond that she gave herself, a voice from the congregation answered, "We do." Martha stood, joined by Henry and several others from the ranch. "Her friends stand for her today." Tears pricked Lucinda's eyes at the unexpected gesture of solidarity. Beside her, Kieran squeezed her hand gently, his smile reflecting her own emotion. The vows they exchanged were traditional in structure but deeply personal in meaning. When Lucinda promised to love and honor Kieran all the days of my life, the words carried the weight of a journey that had brought her from desperate survival to this moment of chosen commitment. When Kieran vowed to cherish and protect her, forsaking all others, those present understood he was rejecting not just other women but the expectations and prejudices of his former life. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared as the ceremony concluded. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The kiss they shared sealed more than their marriage. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, a defiance of the odds that had been stacked against such a union from the start. The celebration afterward, held at the Ashwood Ranch, combined Christmas festivities with wedding traditions. A massive tree stood in the corner of the main room, decorated with paper ornaments made by the school children and strands of cranberries and popcorn. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by those in attendance: roast turkey and ham, potatoes and pies, cookies and cakes that represented the diverse backgrounds of Redemption Creek's residents. As the evening progressed, Lucinda found herself drawn into conversations and connections that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. The minister's wife discussed plans for expanding the school library. The blacksmith's daughter asked shyly about taking reading lessons. Even Mrs. Peterson, owner of the general store and one of the town's most prominent matrons, offered congratulations that seemed genuinely warm. "You've changed this town," Martha observed, finding Lucinda alone for a moment near the punch bowl. "Opened minds, even if just a crack." "I think Kieran deserves most of the credit for that," Lucinda replied, watching her husband across the room as he discussed cattle prices with several ranchers. The word husband still felt foreign on her tongue, but not unwelcome. "Don't sell yourself short," Martha advised. "You stood your ground, lived honestly, refused to be less than who you are. That takes courage the kind people respect, even when they don't admit it." She patted Lucinda's arm affectionately. "Now go dance with that man of yours. It's not every day a girl gets married." The evening concluded with Kieran and Lucinda departing for their wedding night amid good-natured teasing and sincere well-wishes. The ranch hands had decorated the master bedroom with more evergreen boughs and candles, creating an atmosphere of simple elegance that moved Lucinda deeply. As Kieran closed the door behind them, shutting out the world and its judgments, he turned to her with an expression of such tenderness it made her breath catch. "Mrs. Ashwood," he said softly, the name new to both of them. "That will take some getting used to," she admitted with a small smile. "We have a lifetime to practice." He stepped closer, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. "Are you happy, Lucinda?" The question was simple but profound. Happiness had been such a rare visitor in her life that she had learned not to expect or pursue it. Yet standing here in this room with this man who had chosen her despite everything, she recognized the warm certainty in her chest for what it was. "Yes," she answered truthfully, "more than I ever thought possible." His smile illuminated his face. "As am I." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "I love you, Lucinda Ashwood. Every day for the rest of our lives I'll work to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." "You already are," she whispered, rising on her toes to meet his lips with hers. Their kiss deepened, passion mingling with tenderness as they affirmed their vows in the most ancient of ways. That night, in the quiet intimacy of their shared bed, they discovered each other anew not as figures defined by their pasts, but as partners bound by choice and love to a shared future. Spring came early to the Montana territory that year, as if nature itself was celebrating new beginnings. The snow melted from the valley by early March, revealing tender green shoots and wildflowers that dotted the awakening landscape. Life at the Ashwood Ranch settled into rhythms both familiar and new. Kieran continued to expand his cattle operation, his business acumen and fair dealings earning him respect throughout the territory. Lucinda, to her own surprise, found herself embracing the role of rancher's wife with enthusiasm, bringing her practical intelligence and resilience to the challenges of frontier life. Yet she maintained her independence as well. She still rode into town regularly, though now it was to teach reading at the newly expanded school rather than to deal cards at the saloon. She kept her small house in Redemption Creek as a place for women who needed temporary shelter, a safe haven funded by her and Kieran but run largely by the women themselves. Most significantly, Lucinda discovered an unexpected talent for horse breeding. Her eye for good bloodlines and her patient way with even the most difficult animals led Kieran to put her in charge of that aspect of their ranch operations. By the end of their first year of marriage, Ashwood horses were beginning to gain a reputation that extended beyond Montana. Not everything was smooth, of course. Whispers still followed Lucinda in certain circles. Letters occasionally arrived from Boston, usually bearing news of Kieran's family's continued disapproval. A fire destroyed one of their barns in the second autumn, a devastating setback that tested their resilience and that of their ranch hands. But through it all, the foundation they had built together remained solid, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that continued to deepen with each passing season. On their second anniversary, a crisp December day with snow dusting the mountains, Kieran surprised Lucinda with a special dinner at the ranch house, sending the staff to town for the night to give them privacy. "What's the occasion?" she asked as he poured wine into crystal glasses that had once graced his parents' table in Boston. "Besides our anniversary, I mean, you seem expectant." Kieran's smile held a hint of mischief. "Perhaps I simply wanted an evening alone with my beautiful wife." "Perhaps," she agreed, though his manner suggested something more. "But I know that look in your eye, Kieran Ashwood. You're planning something." He laughed, raising his glass in a toast. "To the woman who knows me better than I know myself, 2 years of marriage and I still can't surprise you." They clinked glasses, but he set his down almost immediately, reaching instead for her free hand. "You're right, of course, I do have news." His expression grew more serious. "I received a telegram from Boston yesterday. My father passed away last week." Lucinda's heart sank. Despite the estrangement between Kieran and his father, she knew the news would pain him. "Oh, Kieran, I'm so sorry," he nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "Thank you. It wasn't unexpected. His health has been failing for some time, according to my mother's letters, but it does change things." He took a deep breath. "I've inherited a significant portion of the family business and properties. The lawyers are suggesting I return east to manage these affairs." A cold fear gripped Lucinda's heart. Return east. The words hung between them, laden with implications. Would he want to reclaim his place in Boston society now that his father's opposition was gone? Would he expect her to accompany him to a world that would never truly accept her? Or worse, was this his way of broaching a more permanent separation? "I see," she said carefully, withdrawing her hand from his. "And what have you decided?" Kieran's brow furrowed in confusion at her reaction. Then understanding dawned in his eyes, followed swiftly by dismay. "Lucinda, no, you misunderstand. I'm not considering returning to Boston permanently." "Never that." Relief washed over her, but confusion remained. "Then what are you considering?" "A brief trip, perhaps a month, to settle the legal matters and see my mother. She's alone now, and while we've had our differences, she did try to support my choices in her own way." He reached for her hand again. "I was hoping you would come with me." The suggestion caught her off guard. "To Boston, Kieran, I would be a liability to you there. Your father may be gone, but the society he was part of hasn't changed its views on women with pasts like mine." "I don't care," he said firmly. "You're my wife. I'm proud of who you are, of what we've built together. I won't pretend otherwise, even in Boston." His loyalty warmed her, but practicality tempered her response. "It's not that simple, and you know it." Your inheritance, your mother's position, they could be affected by association with me. Kieran's expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps, but consider this, we wouldn't be staying permanently. We'd be visitors, free to leave when our business is concluded. He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. And there's something more, something I haven't told you yet. Intrigued despite her reservations, Lucinda raised an eyebrow. Oh, the inheritance includes a shipping company, one with interests in the cattle trade. With the railroad expanding westward, there's an opportunity to establish a more direct route for Montana beef to eastern markets. His eyes lit with excitement. We could expand our operations significantly, Lucinda. Create something that would benefit not just us but the entire region. The vision he described was compelling, a chance to build something even more substantial than what they had already achieved. Yet the thought of Boston, with its rigid social hierarchies and judgmental society, still filled her with trepidation. I don't know, Kieran, she admitted. The thought of facing your world, even briefly. It's not my world anymore, he corrected gently. This is you are, but I understand your concerns. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. Think about it, we don't need to decide tonight. Lucinda nodded, grateful for his patience. They continued their anniversary dinner, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, the progress of their newest foal, plans for expanding the orchard come spring, the letter they'd received from Martha and Henry, who had moved to Oregon to be closer to their daughter's family. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Lucinda found herself contemplating Kieran's proposal more seriously. The woman she had been when they first met would have refused outright, seeing only danger in stepping into a world designed to reject her kind. But the woman she had become over these past 2 years loved, respected, secure in her place, was perhaps strong enough to face even Boston society with her head held high. I'll go with you, she said softly into the darkness. Kieran shifted beside her, propping himself up on one elbow to see her face in the moonlight filtering through their window. You're sure? She nodded. Not for Boston or for the inheritance, for you, for us. For this vision you have of expanding what we've built here. A small smile touched her lips. Besides, I've always wanted to see the ocean. The joy that spread across his face confirmed she had made the right decision. You'll have your chance, he promised, gathering her close. And when we return, we'll bring back not just legal documents but ideas and connections that will help us create something even more remarkable here. Just promise me one thing, she murmured against his chest. Anything. Promise that no matter what happens in Boston, we'll come back to this place, to our home. His arms tightened around her. I promise, Lucinda, this is where we belong, where we've always belonged. Their journey east in the spring of 1883 marked Lucinda's first significant travel since arriving in Montana years earlier. The railroad carried them through territories she had only heard about, past settlements that ranged from crude outposts to growing cities. Each mile that took them further from the mountains filled her with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Boston, when they finally arrived after nearly a week of travel, was everything and nothing like she had imagined. The city's grandeur was undeniable, buildings of stone and brick, rising higher than anything in Redemption Creek. Streets crowded with carriages and people dressed in fashions far more elaborate than the practical attire of the frontier. The noise, the smell, the sheer press of humanity was overwhelming after the open spaces of Montana. Kieran's family home in Beacon Hill proved equally intimidating, a 4-story brownstone with polished wood interiors, crystal chandeliers, and furnishings that spoke of generations of wealth and refinement. Servants moved quietly through the rooms, attending to needs Lucinda hadn't even realized she had. Margaret Ashwood, Kieran's mother, met them in the formal parlor upon their arrival. A tall, slender woman with Kieran's blue eyes and an elegant bearing that spoke of lifelong privilege. She greeted her son with genuine warmth before turning an assessing gaze on Lucinda. "So you are the woman who drew my son away from everything he was raised to be," she said, her tone more curious than accusatory. Lucinda met her gaze steadily. "I am his wife, yes." A hint of approval flickered in the older woman's eyes at her directness. "Well, at least you don't simper." "That's something." She gestured for them to sit. "I've had rooms prepared. I assume you'll want to rest before dinner. We have guests joining us this evening, my brother and his wife. They're quite eager to meet you both." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal meetings, social obligations, and private moments of culture shock for Lucinda. Boston society, as she had anticipated, regarded her with suspicion and barely veiled curiosity. Whispers followed her at the few social gatherings she couldn't avoid. Questions about her background were posed with deceptive politeness, fishing for confirmation of rumors that had somehow preceded their arrival. Through it all, Kieran remained steadfastly by her side, his pride in her evident in every introduction, every defense he mounted against subtle slights. To Lucinda's surprise, Margaret Ashwood gradually emerged as an unexpected ally as well. Though never openly affectionate, she displayed a pragmatic respect for Lucinda's intelligence and resilience that grew with each passing day. "You're good for him," Margaret observed one afternoon as they sat in the garden behind the house, a rare moment of privacy between the two women. "He's more himself with you than he ever was here." Lucinda glanced up from the book she'd been reading. "You don't mind that he's chosen a different path, a different world?" Margaret's lips curved in a small smile. "My dear, I married into this world. I wasn't born to it. Did Kieran never tell you?" Surprise registered on Lucinda's face. "No, he didn't." "My father was a shipbuilder, skilled but hardly wealthy. I met Herbert Ashwood when his family commissioned a vessel from my father's yard." Her eyes took on a distant look. "Herbert saw something in me that transcended social boundaries." His family objected, of course, but he was as stubborn then as Kieran is now. She turned her gaze directly to Lucinda. "So you see, I understand more than you might imagine about entering a world that views you as unsuitable. The difference is that I allowed myself to be remade in the image this society expected. You, I suspect, never will." "No," Lucinda agreed softly. "I won't." "Good." Margaret nodded approvingly. "My son needs a wife with backbone, not another Boston society ornament." She rose gracefully from her chair. "Now, about this shipping business Herbert left to Kieran, I have some thoughts on how it might be structured to benefit your Montana ventures. Shall we discuss them over tea?" The business aspects of their trip proved more successful than either had anticipated. With Margaret's surprising guidance and Kieran's legal background, they established arrangements that would indeed create new opportunities for their ranch and the broader Montana cattle industry. Contracts were signed, partnerships formed, and capital secured for expansion upon their return west. Yet as their month in Boston drew to a close, Lucinda found herself increasingly eager to return home. The constraints of city life, the corsets and calling cards, the rigid schedules and restrictive social codes felt more confining with each passing day. She missed the mountains, the open sky, the freedom of riding across their land with the wind in her hair. Most of all, she missed the sense of purpose that defined their life in Montana, the tangible results of their labor, the community they were helping to build, the future they were creating together. On their final evening in Boston, after a formal dinner with Margaret's closest friends, a gathering that had been surprisingly cordial, Kieran found Lucinda standing at the window of their bedroom, gazing out at the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, coming to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "I was thinking about home," she admitted, leaning back against him, "about how ready I am to return to it." "As am I." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I'm grateful for this time here, for the chance to reconnect with my mother, to settle my father's affairs properly." Lucinda turned in his arms to face him. "I'm glad we came, Kieran, truly. I've learned things here I couldn't have imagined." She smiled slightly. "Your mother, for one." "She's nothing like I expected." "She likes you," he observed. More than she's liked anyone I've introduced her to, including Charlotte. The mention of his first wife might once have created tension, but time and security had healed that particular vulnerability. She sees herself in me, I think, Lucinda replied thoughtfully. The outsider who married an Ashwood against society's expectations. Perhaps. Kieran's expression grew more serious. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, something I've been considering since we made the arrangements for expanding the ranch operation. Curious, Lucinda waited for him to continue. The expansion will mean more hands, more activity around the main house, he began. Less privacy for us, more demands on your time as the operation grows, she nodded, having already considered these implications. What would you think about building a new house? Something a short ride from the main ranch buildings, overlooking that bend in the creek you love. A place that would be just ours, separate from the business aspects of the ranch. The suggestion took her by surprise. You'd want to move away from the main house, after all the work you've put into it. The main house can serve as the business headquarters, guest accommodations, housing for the foreman, he explained. But I find myself wanting something that's truly ours, designed for our needs, our preferences. A home rather than a working ranch house. The idea appealed to Lucinda more than she would have expected. A place built specifically for them, reflecting their shared vision rather than adapting a structure created for someone else. I'd like that, she said softly. Very much. His smile broadened. I thought you might. I've already sketched some ideas, we can discuss them on the journey home. He caressed her cheek gently. Perhaps we could include a nursery, for the future. The implication in his words sent a flutter through Lucinda's chest. They had discussed children in abstract terms before, but the realities of ranch life and building their business had put practical planning on hold. Now, with the ranch expanding and their position more secure, the possibility seemed less distant. A nursery would be. Wise planning, she agreed, her voice slightly unsteady with emotion. For the future. Kieran's eyes softened with understanding of all she wasn't saying, her fears about motherhood given her own orphaned state, her concerns about bringing children into a world that might judge them for their mother's past. Her deep-seated worry that she might somehow fail at this most fundamental of roles. You'll be an extraordinary mother, he said gently, when the time is right. The confidence in his voice, the absolute certainty in his eyes, eased something tight within her chest. And you'll be a wonderful father. He kissed her then, a kiss that carried all the promise of the future they were building together, a future neither could have imagined when they first met on that dusty street in Redemption Creek. Their return journey west felt like a homecoming in the truest sense. With each mile the train carried them closer to Montana, Lucinda felt layers of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying begin to fall away. By the time the familiar silhouette of the mountains appeared on the horizon, she felt more herself than she had in weeks. Henry's son, who had managed the ranch in their absence, met them at the station with the wagon. The young man's detailed report on the ranch operations during the journey back filled Lucinda with pride. Everything had continued smoothly, testament to the solid foundation they had built and the loyal hands they had gathered. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Lucinda felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily stole her breath. This was home, not the grand brownstone in Boston with its polished surfaces and formal rooms, but this sprawling, still evolving place carved from the wilderness by their own hands and vision. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashwood," Kieran said softly, as if reading her thoughts. She turned to him, finding in his face the same contentment she felt in her own heart. It's good to be back where we belong. The years that followed brought the fulfillment of many dreams and the inevitable challenges of frontier life. The new house was completed by the following spring, a beautiful structure of local stone and timber that balanced Kieran's appreciation for craftsmanship with Lucinda's preference for practical comfort. set on a gentle rise overlooking both the creek and the distant mountains. It provided the private sanctuary they had envisioned while remaining close enough to the main ranch operations for convenience. The expanded cattle business flourished, benefiting from the eastern connections they had established in Boston. Ashwood beef began appearing on tables in Chicago, New York, and Boston itself, commanding premium prices for its quality. The horse breeding program that was Lucinda's particular passion gained national recognition, with Ashwood horses sought by buyers from across the country. Redemption Creek grew alongside their success, transforming gradually from a rough frontier outpost to a more established town. Lucinda's reading classes evolved into a proper school for adults, housed in a small building Kieran donated to the community. Her work with women in need expanded as well, creating opportunities for those who might otherwise have found themselves trapped in circumstances similar to her own early struggles. 3 years after their return from Boston, Margaret Ashwood surprised them both by relocating to Montana, having sold the Boston house and most of its contents. "Boston holds too many ghosts," she explained simply upon arrival, "and my only family is here now." She settled into a cottage on the ranch property, her Eastern refinement gradually blending with Western practicality in ways that mirrored her son's own journey. To Lucinda's ongoing amazement, she and her mother-in-law developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared determination. It was Margaret who was present when, in the winter of 1887, Lucinda gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Eleanor Rose, after both their mothers. Kieran, trapped in town by a sudden blizzard, returned home to find his wife exhausted but radiant, his mother uncharacteristically emotional, and his newborn daughter perfect in every way. "She has your eyes," Lucinda whispered as he held his daughter for the first time, his large hands cradling her tiny form with infinite care. "And your strength," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I can see it already." Standing in their bedroom, the three of them together for the first time, Lucinda felt a sense of completion she had never imagined possible. The journey from that fateful night when Kieran had walked her home from the saloon to this moment seemed both impossibly long and remarkably direct, as if every step, however difficult, had been leading precisely here. 2 years later, Eleanor was joined by a brother, William Kieran, born during a summer thunderstorm that broke a month-long drought. Their family complete, Lucinda and Kieran settled into the rhythm of raising their children while continuing to build their legacy. The children grew strong in the clean Montana air, educated both by formal schooling and the practical lessons of ranch life. Eleanor developed her mother's affinity for horses and her father's love of books, a combination that made her a formidable personality from an early age. William inherited Kieran's steady temperament and Lucinda's determination, showing an early interest in both the cattle operation and the natural world around him. Both children were raised knowing the truth of their parents' journey not all at once, but in age-appropriate increments that emphasized the values of resilience, honesty, and judging others by their actions rather than rumors. They grew up understanding that their mother's unconventional past was not a source of shame but evidence of her extraordinary strength. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Kieran surprised Lucinda with a journey she had long dreamed of but never expected to take. They traveled to the Pacific coast, leaving the children in Margaret's capable care for 2 weeks while they explored the shoreline of Oregon and Northern California. Standing on a windswept beach, watching the endless waves crash against the shore, Lucinda felt a sense of wonder that made her feel young again, reminded of the girl she had been before life had forced her to grow up too quickly. "It's even more magnificent than I imagined," she said, her voice nearly lost in the roar of the surf. Kieran stood behind her, arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Worth waiting for?" "Yes," she replied simply, "like so many things." He turned her in his arms to face him, the setting sun casting golden light across their features. At 42, Kieran's dark hair was now threaded with silver at the temples, lines of experience marking the corners of his eyes. At 36, Lucinda remained as striking as the day they met, though her own experiences had left their gentle marks as well. "If you could go back," he asked quietly, "to that night when I first walked you home, would you change anything? Choose differently?" Lucinda considered the question seriously, as was her nature. The decade they had shared had not been without struggles, droughts, and blizzards that threatened the ranch, illnesses that had frightened them both, moments of conflict that required compromise and growth. The whispers about her past had never completely ceased, though they had faded to insignificance in the face of the life and reputation she had built. "Not a single moment," she answered truthfully. "Every choice, every struggle, every joy has been exactly as it should be." Kieran's smile, the same smile that had first begun to melt the ice around her heart all those years ago, warmed her still. "Even when I told you that you were the only one for me, especially then," she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Because you were right." As twilight settled over the beach, they walked hand in hand along the shore, their footprints washing away behind them with each advancing wave. Ahead, their future stretched out like the horizon vast, full of possibility and ultimately shaped by the same force that had brought them together against all odds. The courage to believe that love could transcend the boundaries of past and circumstance, creating something enduring from the most unlikely of beginnings. In Redemption Creek and beyond, their story would be told for generations how a woman with a troubled past and a man seeking a new beginning found in each other not just love, but redemption. How they built a legacy of compassion, opportunity, and second chances that transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of all those their story touched. And it had begun with 7 simple words, spoken in the dusty streets of a frontier town. "You don't want a woman like me," she said. The cowboy answered, "You're the only one."